So you mentioned you grew this magazine to a large size with the help of Princess Trust. You're now Culture Group. So explain to us what Culture Group now does.
So Culture Group came out of the success of the magazine. There's quite a long story behind it all, which I won't go into in entirety, but in summary, lots of people started contacting me saying that they really liked the way that the magazine communicated to the youth market, and would you be interested in running some campaigns for them? And that started with an approach from different charitable organisations, the first one being a children's charity called NCH, who are now called Action for Children. And they gave me one of my first briefs, which I remember clearly to this day, which is, will you help us establish why young people have become so disengaged from mainstream politics? And for a teenager who had really no interest in politics whatsoever, that was quite a brief, given that I'd only ever really worked on music events and festivals and that sort of stuff. So it was something that I thought to myself, well, I like a challenge. And I said yes. I ended up meeting with the key comms team for NCH. And we put together what was one of the first main text messaging campaigns for the youth market, which is called Text Tony. And the idea being that young people could text their views direct to the Prime Minister, and we'd collate them and present them back and that sort of thing. So we had everything from young people should be able to bring back hanging to let people vote at the age of 16.
Right, okay.
And that just turned into quite a successful sort of campaign result for us. We took it to the Labour Party conference with the charity, which received press coverage with the likes of Bill Clinton and others there, and it was just an incredible opportunity for us. Wow. And from that point onwards, really, we started looking at how we could develop things for other organisations. We started working closely to look at how we started syndicating the coverage that had been in the magazine, and we started working with loads of events as their key partners and their key media partners, and started selling in the add-ons as coverage. So we'd go to things like Glastonbury Festival. We started working with them as a key part of their web team, to the point that I was editor at one point of the Glastonbury Festival website, and had a team around the site of over 100 people who were collating different bits of coverage, content, and we started syndicating that for the festival then to the different media outlets, running our own stage at the event and all sorts of bits and pieces. So it spiraled from there, and out of that came the need for Culture Group, which the idea being that we're a brand agency. We work to help brands effectively communicate with their given audience. That could be whether that's through events, experiential marketing, PR, through any of sort of the general services. But we work specifically in the area to look at the narrative behind a brand and how they tell their story.
Okay. So how important is that then to a brand to be able to communicate effectively, specifically with young people? And how can that be translated to a small business? Is it as important?
It's vital to a small business. You have to have your identity. The identity is key. And I think that, again, is something that businesses miss or overlook when they first begin. They're sort of always focused on the product, but the product needs to come with a story behind it. And if you've got a story, it's much easier to sell something. And I think that's one of the key things that most businesses need to focus on now, particularly in the current economy and the current climate. They need to look at how they engage, and you only engage via a compelling story. So I think that's got to be the key thing around that, and all the components that fit around that are, what's the visual identity, what's the story of the person who's created it, what's the background behind the product, and then what do you see as the potential for that in its development.
Yeah, absolutely. So you must have come, you're still young yourself. You say that, this was a 10-year journey, but still, when you start at 15, you're still a very, very young man. So you must have come across a few tough decisions, and it must have been a very steep learning curve. You must have learnt an awful lot about business as well as yourself. So perhaps for people watching this, is there something you could, maybe some advice you could give them in terms of, or perhaps there was something you'd do differently that you might share?
I guess there's a few cliched things, like I think you have to be an eternal optimist. And I think that helps you get over some of the bigger challenges. I've had a lot of things thrown at me during my business development. The first main hurdle being the trademark of my magazine name, and me being challenged by an international media company over that name. And everyone around me telling me, why didn't you just change the name? And I refused to back down on that. It was my baby, it was my asset, it was what I'd built up. And, you know, I stuck firm to that, and it drew me through a 3-year legal battle, which fortunately at the end I won. And I now license the name back to the media organisation, which is a bit of a strange turnaround. But it was one of those things that, you know, you could have easily given up. And I think it's that importance that you just have to have that optimism behind what you do.
Yeah, so do you think that was in part due to your youth then? Do you think being a young kind of entrepreneur helped you?
I think starting younger is always a good thing, because you go into it with less preconceived ideas. Right. I think one of the best pieces of advice that I was given during the course of things is that a no is never a no forever. It's only a no at that moment in time. And a no can always be turned into a yes. And I love that sort of way of thinking, that methodology, that actually, you know, there's always a solution to something, and there's not always a brick wall in front of you. There's always a way around that wall, whether you have to go under it, bulldoze through it, or something happens to it. There's always a way to overcome it. And I love that methodology, that you can always turn a no eventually into a yes. Yeah. It might just be that the person you've asked had a bad day that day, and you go back to them in 2 months' time with a different proposition, and they may say yes.
So do you think that's something that all entrepreneurs share, or all business people share?
I think certainly it's a quality that I've seen loads of different other entrepreneurs that I've come into contact with, that they have that conviction and that self-belief. And I think you've got to have, it's not necessarily about self-confidence, but it is about a self-belief and an inner belief and conviction in what you're trying to achieve.
Definitely. So I can't, going back to the culture group, I can't ignore these guys behind us. We've got Pixie Lot and Plan B, various other things. You have a number of clients now. How do you see Culture Group going forward? Is there anything, you branching out into any other areas?
We're continuing to expand the sort of service set that we provide. So we have different interests that span everything from print content creation through to interactive, clickable video, and all sorts of different tech that's being developed behind what we do. Right. Different sophisticated syndication services. There's a lot of growth plans, I think it's fair to say. Yeah. I'd like to expand in a few overseas territories. Is probably the next step for us. We've got a really fantastic client base in the UK now that we're really quite pleased and still keep pinching ourselves that we have. But it's just great to work with a variety of people. Our specialism has always been the youth market. We have now started branching out outside of that. That will still remain a specialism, but we work now a lot with different consumer brands and blue chip brands. So it's the idea being that we could expand into different territories.
Okay, well that's great. I wish you the best of luck, Glynn. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers, Pixie. Thank you, Plan B.